Hello, this is Little Green Ghouls, and welcome back to Goosebumps Revisited, Series 2000. This week, I'm excited to visit Slappy's Nightmare. I was curious to see where yet another living dummy book was going to take us after just learning of this book's existence last week, and I can't say it went anywhere all that interesting. Stein tries his best to shake up the dummy formula by having Slappy be cursed to perform 3 good deeds, or he'll essentially die, but I still found this book to be a bit stale. I just don't think we needed another Slappy story, and I don't think you'd be missing much if you skipped it. I like this 1999 cover, but it does feel out of place when you compare it to the rest of the Series 2000 covers. This one just feels a little more cartoony and silly compared to the rest. I will say, my favorite part of this cover has to be these grouchy little sheep on the sheets though. Our front tag says, Sweet Screams, which is a play on Sweet Dreams, and stays on story theme. But let's check out the back of this book. Slappy stared down in amazement at the dummy stretched out in the crate. There was no mistaking it. The dummy was his identical twin. Where'd you get that piece of junk? He demanded sarcastically, but his eyes darted nervously from side to side. Jimmy O. James carefully picked up the new dummy and a yellowed stack of papers. I found him in a magic store, and these instructions tell how to bring this other dummy to life, and how to put you to sleep forever. Okay, let's start this summary. The book opens with an introduction to Jimmy O. James. If you recall from Bride of the Living Dummy, he was the ventriloquist who tossed Slappy in the dumpster and left the children to deal with him on their own. Well, it looks like Jimmy O. James is back with Slappy somehow, and is currently nervously waiting to perform on stage with him once again. As per usual, Slappy's berating this man with non-stop insults and threats of violence. Performing with Slappy is a nerve-wracking experience for Jimmy, because he never knows when Slappy is just going to take it too far. The kids in the audience love Slappy's insult humor, and are blissfully unaware that it really is just Slappy verbally abusing Jimmy for 30 minutes straight. Naturally, Slappy starts to get too mean with his jokes, and starts to lose his audience, noticeably when he starts joking about sticking a fork in Jimmy's eye, and when he compares him to yellow dog vomit. Jimmy decides to change gears once the audience is no longer laughing, and asks if anyone in the audience would like to come up and meet Slappy. I have no idea why he would offer this when it's clear Slappy's getting all worked up, so why decide now is the time to have him interact with children? Seems like a recipe for failure. Some poor fat kid lumbers onto the stage and is immediately torn to shreds by Slappy. He's insulted and called a fat meatball. Slappy then declares, "Let's see how the meatball tastes," and snaps his teeth down onto the kid's ear. Jimmy's like, "Oh no, Slappy, stop." But what the fuck do you think is gonna happen, Jimmy? This isn't your first rodeo. I do enjoy the chaos of it all though. The kid is thrashing around trying to get Slappy off his ear, and the audience is in full-on panic mode. Some people are rushing to the stage to help, while others are fleeing for the exits. Slappy finally releases this kid's ear, and then lets out a deafening high-pitched siren wail, which causes the audience to drop to the ground holding their ears, because his shriek is so loud it's actually physically painful. Just to make it even more exciting, Slappy has also somehow sealed everyone in so they can't escape the theater. The story then cuts to backstage, and Jimmy O. James is telling Slappy this is the last time he's ever performing with him again. I'd like to know how that previous scene ended. Like, there's no way all those parents all just left without further escalation, even if Slappy did release them eventually. Jimmy laments that his career is over and that he'll never work again. Jimmy is kind of a selfish character because he has no issue putting all these kids in danger during each of his shows, as long as it works out for him in the end. Slappy is basically like, all press is good press in show business, and tells Jimmy thanks to him, they'll be in newspapers across the country after that last performance. Jimmy then informs Slappy that this will be his last show because he's found a replacement. He then pulls out a large crate and reveals another Slappy. Apparently, the evil sorcerer who created Slappy from coffin wood made another dummy named Wally, who looks just like Slappy. Gee, how could this all go wrong? Wally also came with pages of instructions on how to control the evil magic within the dummies, including a spell on how to put Slappy back to sleep. Slappy does not take this news well and proceeds to tackle the lifeless Wally, tearing his head off and chucking it across the room. He then pounces on Jimmy O. James and declares he's going to rip his head off and stick it on Wally's body. Now that's a story I'd like to see. Jimmy starts to black out as Slappy strangles him, but can suddenly breathe again because Slappy's attempted murder gets interrupted by siblings Georgia and Stella. They're backstage because they missed the show earlier and wanted to meet both Slappy and Jimmy. Stein quickly establishes that Georgia is the nice sibling and that Stella is a mean little shit. Everything Stella says is in a nasty tone and needlessly insulting. Slappy could fall in love with Stella given his track record with children, and their similar personalities. Georgia goes on to say how she's an amateur ventriloquist herself and just wants to shake Slappy's hand. Meanwhile, from the floor, Slappy's shouting out his usual insults at both Georgia and Stella, but they just think it's Jimmy showing off his talents. Jimmy then says he has a surprise for the girls, but needs a minute to get it ready and has them wait outside the dressing room. He then goes back to his stack of magic papers and finishes putting a spell on Slappy. It really makes no sense that Slappy would just sit there and let Jimmy put a spell on him, but whatever. This spell at first seems like it's going to put Slappy to sleep forever, but after Slappy begs for one more chance, Jimmy reveals it's a special curse. Slappy will have to do 3 good deeds in 1 week, otherwise he'll be put to sleep forever, and he also can't do anything bad. Jimmy then hands Slappy over to Georgia as a gift and says, now that he has Wally, he doesn't need Slappy anymore. This is definitely a twist on the Living Dummy books, but I have to say I'm still burnt out on Slappy. It's been 28 pages of me being like, yep, just a bunch of the usual Slappy stuff, so hopefully things pick up from here. Also, Jimmy continues to be a low-key monster by handing Slappy over to Georgia, curse or not. We don't get any clarity on if this book happened before or after Bride of the Living Dummy. Regardless, Jimmy is clearly a character that's like, fuck these kids. Stella is incredibly jealous of Georgia's gift and insults both Jimmy and Slappy. The girls leave and Jimmy is left wondering if he did the right thing by giving Slappy to Georgia. Obviously not. If you as a full-grown man can't handle Slappy, why give him to a defenseless 12-year-old? We then cut to Georgia, who's busy practicing her ventriloquist skills in her bedroom, while Stella mocks her as she finger paints. We learn Stella has a problem flying, and Georgia's mom comes stumbling into the room complaining about what a pigsty it is. Georgia and her mom go back and forth over cleaning up the room, but Georgia doesn't want to because she wants to practice with Slappy, so she can one day perform an act at school, because of course that's what she wants to do. Why should we expect anything different after 4 of these dummy books? Georgia tries cleaning up for a bit, but decides it's just too boring to handle and goes to sleep instead. After Georgia is asleep, Slappy stirs to life and says, look out everyone, here comes Slappy. The twist is, instead of his usual path of destruction and blackmail, he instead gets to work on doing his first good deed by cleaning up Georgia's room. Doing this disgusts him, but he knows he has to in order for the curse to be lifted. Then he can get his revenge on Jimmy O. James. Once Slappy has cleaned the room, he falls asleep, only to be awoken by Georgia's screams because somebody has trashed her room. That someone, of course, is Stella, and Slappy is pissed that his good deed was just wasted. It may also be Wally 2 as a twist, but we'll see. To me, it's just unlikely Stein would let a second Slappy exist without including him in the main plot. Slappy spies on Georgia and Stella as Georgia tears into her sister, and Stella denies trashing the room. Georgia's mom comes thundering up the stairs, and Slappy panics that he's about to get caught, so he's forced to fall limp on the floor in the hallway. The mom trips over Slappy and throws him to the side. She then proceeds to both sides of the issue of the trashed bedroom situation and grounds both of her children. Slappy wastes no time, and once Stella is alone, he marches up to her and is basically like, don't fuck with my good deed again or you'll regret it. He even tells her that he'll stick his arm so far down her throat that her stomach will have splinters. I appreciate this switch up with Slappy wasting no time to confront a kid. It's also fun seeing things from his point of view. The mom walks back in and nearly catches Slappy walking around. Stella starts shrieking how Slappy is alive, and her mom just dismisses it as more of Stella's lies. The mom even says Stella is probably lying about trashing the room too, but for some reason doesn't unground Georgia. If I were Georgia, I would be livid at how the mom is handling this. The next day, the mom sends Georgia to perform her ventriloquist act for a girl stuck in a wheelchair with a broken hip. Slappy is happy to have another opportunity for a good deed, but this gets interrupted when Stella announces she's going too. They arrive at Maggie's house, and we learn she broke her hip while water skiing on vacation. Georgia does a simple little performance with Slappy, and he thinks to himself this is his easiest good deed so far, because he just has to keep his mouth shut and be a true dummy. Georgia has a phone call inside the house and leaves Stella, Slappy, and Maggie alone for 30 seconds, and then Stein decides to get wild out of the blue and launches Maggie into traffic. She spun around and saw the wheelchair rolling down the hill. Bumping hard over the grass, picking up speed, Maggie's arms flew up helplessly, grabbed at nothing but air. Faster, faster, the wheelchair rocketing down the steep hill, down into the street. Maggie's terrified cry rang out in Georgia's ears. Help me! Stop this, somebody! Georgia saw Stella, up on her feet now, standing so stiffly, frozen in terror. With Maggie's cries in her ears, Georgia took a few lurching steps down the lawn. She heard the shrill squeal of tires before she saw the blue van roar into the street. No, Georgia let out a helpless cry as the wheelchair bounced on its collision course with the speeding van. Did the van hit Maggie's chair? Georgia's eyes blurred from her terror, but now she saw Maggie fly up from the chair, fly onto the pavement. Maggie's screams stopped. Such a heavy, heavy silence now. Maggie didn't move. Scenes like these are what makes these books still fun after like 80 of them. Can't say I saw Stein throwing a wheelchair-bound child down a hill, Little House on the Prairie style.
Filthy animal!
Nellie, your mother wants you. Nellie! You're such a good friend, Nellie!
We learn the van didn't actually hit her. She fell out of the chair after it hit a bump instead, but she did manage to break her arm. After the ambulance carries Maggie away, Georgia tries to figure out what happened. Stella insists that Slappy got behind Maggie's chair and pushed her, but Georgia obviously doesn't believe her. Meanwhile, Slappy's in the grass thinking this child is nuts because he knows he didn't push Maggie either, and is pissed at Stella for now ruining 2 of his good deeds, and concludes that tonight Stella is dead meat. We cut to later that night, and the mom is on the phone with a friend, sharing her concerns over her psycho daughter. She's somewhat convinced Stella pushed Maggie into traffic, and is considering taking her in to be evaluated. It cuts to bedtime, and Slappy is planning his revenge on Stella. He really makes it sound like he's gonna murder the girl. His plans get slightly interrupted when he's placed on the tallest shelf in Georgia's room, making it extra hard for him to sneak out quietly. Once Georgia is asleep, he tries his best to crawl down carefully, but ends up knocking a bunch of things onto the floor. This wakes up Georgia briefly and she falls back asleep. Then he creeps into Stella's room, but is confused to find her missing. Stella has one up on Slappy and flicks on the lights, revealing an axe in hand. She charges at Slappy and manages to chop his foot in half. Then, before he can even react, she brings the axe down on his head with a loud crack. Slappy is dazed and sees flashing red lights as he fades into blackness because he's good and dead. Not really though, this was all just a dream fake out. Slappy comes to on the floor beneath the bookshelf because he was knocked unconscious when trying to crawl down earlier. He reminds himself that he only has 4 days left to do 3 good deeds and heads into Stella's room. He should have taken his dream as a warning though, because before he can even process what's happening, he's smashed in the head with an axe. He comes to again and hears 3 angry voices arguing with each other. It turns out that Stella hit him in the head with a baseball bat, not an axe, because she thought there was a burglar in the house after hearing the crash in Georgia's room. Georgia and her mom are like, Jesus Christ, here we go again, and tell Stella they're sick of her lies. The next day, Slappy is back on the shelf, trying to figure out how to do his good deeds, and still considering killing Stella. I'm not sure how murdering Stella wouldn't count as a bad deed that would force him into a cursed sleep, but why would we expect Stein to follow his own rules at this point? Georgia arrives home after school, pulls Slappy down, and announces that they're going to babysit the kid across the street. Stella is nosing around, and Slappy's like, we can't get a break from this girl, because he knows she'll somehow mess up any potential good deeds. They hurry across the street in a massive thunderstorm. Slappy is dismayed to learn Robbie, the kid they're babysitting, is a giant wimp and doesn't think he'll be able to pull off any good deeds. Robbie is terrified of Slappy, so he spends the evening sitting in an armchair while Georgia attempts to entertain this bratty little kid. Robbie is eventually sent to bed, and Georgia falls asleep watching TV, when Slappy hears strange noises coming from Robbie's bedroom. Georgia is fast asleep and not checking on this kid like she should be doing, so Slappy considers this an opportunity for a good deed. He sneaks into the room and finds Robbie twisted up in his blanket, choking himself. I didn't know this was a thing. At first he thinks, serves you right you little freak, but decides to get this good deed done with and untangles Robbie from the blankets. Some time passes and Robbie's parents return home, just in time to hear Robbie start screaming. Georgia and her parents race into the bedroom and find Robbie tied up in the curtains. This seems too extreme for Stella, so I still think Wally from earlier is running around. He's an exact match for Slappy after all. The parents throw Georgia out, and as she's walking back home, she sees little footprints in the mud and concludes it must be Stella who tied Robbie up in the curtains. Slappy once again can't get over how twisted this girl is, and is livid his third good deed was once again ruined. At the house, the mom acknowledges that all these bad things started happening after Slappy arrived, and suggests that Georgia maybe put him away for a bit, but Georgia's like this is bullshit for her to be punished over Stella's actions. They all go to bed, and Slappy wastes no time and beelines it for Stella's room. As he's creeping up on her bed, he's debating whether he should strangle her or smother her. These thoughts are then interrupted by a flash of light because Stella has taken a Polaroid of him walking around. Slappy tackles her to the ground and they wrestle for a bit. Right before Slappy is getting ready to smash her face in, the lights kick on and he goes limp. The mom and Georgia are once again met with a hysterical Stella who insists Slappy is alive. They just think she's crazy though, and when she shows them the blurry Polaroid picture of Slappy standing by the bed, they think she just propped him up against it. The mom tells Georgia to lock Slappy up, but she can't because that's when Slappy learns he's off to school tomorrow. We jump to school the next day, and Georgia's busy entertaining the lunchroom with her ventriloquist act. At this school, it's apparently tradition for the kids to volunteer to perform during lunchtime on a cafeteria stage. The act is not going great, and no one is laughing at Georgia's jokes. Slappy notices a purple baseball hat outside the cafeteria window and thinks it's Stella, since she's always in a purple hat. He decides he can't take it anymore, and he needs to end her once and for all. Slappy hops off of Georgia's lap and strolls across the stage, which shocks the entire lunchroom and Georgia as they collectively realize Slappy is alive. When he reaches the window where the purple hat is, he plans on strangling Stella, but is instead face to face with Wally. We learn it's been Wally this whole time who's trashed the room, pushed the wheelchair into traffic, and tied Robbie in the drapes. I can't tell if this was super obvious the whole time, or I just guessed lucky at the start and have read too many of these damn books. Wally says the only way he can stay alive is if Slappy fails his 3 good deeds, and the 2 of the dummies start to wrestle. Wally smashes Slappy's head onto the ground while screaming "die," and the entire cafeteria of children and staff are all watching in shock. Slappy crawls over the stoves and is able to toss a pot of boiling pea soup all over Wally, scalding him and causing him to scream in agony. He then chucks a pot of hot macaroni and cheese on Wally too, while the entire school continues to watch this dummy battle. Georgia tries to step in to figure out what's going on, but Slappy doesn't have any more patience left in him and stuffs Georgia's face into a pot of hot spaghetti. The 2 dummies roll around in the pea soup a bit more before Georgia hoists them up by their shirt collars and proceeds to heave them across the room into some sort of trash compactor / grinder. Both Slappy and Wally scream in pain as they feel themselves being ground into sawdust from the toes up, and then they drift off into blackness. Slappy then opens his eyes and is back in Jimmy O. James's dressing room. It turns out this entire book has been a dream. This shouldn't be all that surprising since it's literally titled Slappy's Nightmare, but this remains my least favorite kind of twist that Stein likes to invoke, so to have an entire book actually be a dream is a no for me. Slappy is so thankful to be alive, he dances around the room as Jimmy tries to have a serious conversation with him, but Slappy just ignores him. Jimmy then gets a special delivery, and when they crack open the crate, Slappy is face to face with Wally, just like in his nightmare. Jimmy then says, "Sometimes nightmares come true," and then quickly begins to read from a stack of magic papers. So that's how this one ends. It was all a dream, but wait, it was actually a premonition kind of? I could have done without this book. Overall, I thought Slappy's Nightmare continued her trend of diminishing returns on the Living Dummy books. I liked that Stein tried to switch it up by giving us Slappy's point of view, and the irony of him trying his best to do good things, but it still just hit many of the usual beats of the Living Dummy book. For me, this book stayed pretty stale, and the final twist being it was only a dream really didn't do the book any favors. It's hard for me to even compare it to the other Living Dummy books, because they're all really starting to blend together for me at this point. I'm gonna give this one 3 out of 5 bowls of pea soup. It tried something different, but I still don't think we really needed a 5th dummy book. I did like that Slappy felt meaner than ever in it though. As far as the vomit count goes, Slappy compares people to vomit in the story, but no one actually vomits in Slappy's Nightmare, which is a wasted opportunity considering that's like one of his superpowers. This leaves our Series 2000 total to 15. Well, that's it for Slappy's Nightmare. I found this one to be fine and nothing to write home about. Next week is Earth Geeks Must Go. I've enjoyed Stein's other forays into sci-fi stories, so I'm optimistic about this one. It's also crazy to me that we're almost done with Series 2000. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Slappy's Nightmare. Did you think Wally was obvious? Where does this stack up compared to the other Living Dummy books for you? What did you think of the "it's only a dream" twist? Also, how did you like my evil doll horror clips? These are always tricky clips to gather because YouTube will sometimes interpret the various evil dolls as actual children and turn off the comments and tank the video. Anyways, as always, thanks again for watching and make sure you subscribe for
the pride, the love,